Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Kai Ehrhardt. So Kai, what to say about him? He's a Middendorf breath therapist, continuum teacher. I want to ask him about both of those. He also runs the Body IQ Festival in Berlin, which I'll be going to. And a centre there in Berlin, which is a bit of a hub for somatic work, actually. I visited not that long ago. So I'm really looking forward to this one. Kai, welcome.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me.
It was a pleasure. So how did you get interested in the body? What was the beginning of your journey, Kai?
The beginning was essentially an HIV diagnosis. I was in California at the time in the mid-90s, and there was a doctor who told me if I'm lucky, I have 5 more years to live.
Wow. And
so that was a bit of a signal that at that time, at least, school medicine was not really my go-to direction if I wanted to somehow deal with the situation. And so I started there, and California was a great place to do so, to investigate everything that had to do with alternative medicine, with nutrition, and so I kind of ended up exploring different things. And my first kind of contact that also had something to do with what was important for me, because HIV somehow also relates to sexuality. You know, it's like being a gay man, there's on the one hand a message of this is not really, this is not really something that is validated culturally. And then on top of it came this diagnosis at the time when I was 21. So that is like when people decide what they want to do with their life, when they go to college or when they, make plans. And for me, it was like, well, how the fuck do I survive? And so body and anything sort of to do with alternative ways of trying to understand what's going on was then coming. It was just a natural progression.
Yeah, I'd love to ask more about the HIV diagnosis, if you don't mind. Can I ask?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of place the scene here. So I remember this time as I was a child at the time, and it was this kind of new thing that came out, and there was a lot of misinformation and prejudice, particularly around the gay community around this. And as I understand it, the Castro in California was really just cut through, and a lot of casualties there. And it's not, maybe younger people listening might not know this, but there wasn't the kind of antivirals around there is today. So like many people like you were told, you've got a year to live, you've got 5 years to live. It was a very different reality being diagnosed HIV positive then than now, right?
Yeah, definitely. And so for me, part of actually then ending up staying in the States was shame-based. Of course, I was also interested in being in a different culture and having that sort of adventure and excitement that was related to that. But I originally just went there for 6 months, but then I ended up staying there because there was a part of me that just was just mortified to go back home, until I had gotten a grip on the situation and sort of found my own way of dealing with it. But since it started in the 80s, it had already progressed a little bit by the time I was affected. There were already some things that were coalescing that provided some support. And one thing that was really helpful for me was finding a school that still exists today called Body Electric School, because there were some of the teachers there who really took this archetypal kind of energy of what you could call the sort of sacred intimate into that relating to people who are sick, meaning people devoting time and energy to being with people who were basically ostracized now and stigmatized, and being with them in various roles. And some of these roles were just to be there and touch them. There were actual people there who would go and just have sessions with people who had HIV/AIDS and then touch them just to provide that, whatever happens when we touch each other, because that was the first thing that, where people were removed from.
Yeah, no, I remember Princess Diana was on the TV and she was sort of controversial that she touched people with AIDS. Yeah. And there's this prejudice that like, oh, you're going to catch something. And it seemed to me that HIV has this mysterious quality that it can be hidden and it can be not obvious. I lived in a HIV awareness circus actually in Ethiopia. And I've also heard some stories from, say, Aikido friends who were diagnosed HIV and were HIV positive. And then people wouldn't train with them. People were scared to touch them and this kind of thing. And obviously, there's, care around bloodborne and things like this. But, you're not going to get HIV off someone training Aikido with them. So it's, hearing the stories was quite painful. And this element of fear, this element of mystery, the element of the sort of unknown, mysterious killer seemed to be the kind of archetype. And I'm obviously, I'm pretty ignorant about this stuff. So you fill me in here. Like, wow. I'm curious about the whole somatics of that from the inside.
Well, for me, the somatics, meaning that when I sort of shifted toward sensory awareness, then suddenly a whole another recontextualization happens. Like this is a general kind of thing, no matter whether it's about HIV or anything, my relationship to whatever is a conflict or what feels really difficult starts to shift the moment I actually change my perspective to it. So when I sense my breath or when I sense the ground, whatever is going on, whether it's HIV or whatever, I get a different relationship to it. Like I have a different place of being with it in my body that might before have been something like an enemy, something that has betrayed me, something that kind of, I can't trust anymore. I can kind of begin to reestablish a relationship with it, but also lose the grip a bit of all the concepts and stories that are laid on top of it through that.
Yeah, Paul Linden we had on the show has Parkinson's, and he talked about befriending his Parkinson's and his sort of fear response to having Parkinson's when he was first diagnosed, and how he would work with that. So he wasn't layering this extra kind of self-loathing or disgust or anything like that on top of it.
Well, the first thing that I took basically in terms of medication was AZT. And that stuff was so strong that to this day, when I see one of these pill containers, where you have Monday through Sunday and you have this little flip for each day where you can compartmentalize your pills, I had my pills in there. And to this day, when I see one of these containers in a store, I get nauseous. This is the kind of strength this is what this AZT stuff did with me. And at some point, I was in Southern California at the beach and I just decided to bury it, no matter what's going to happen to me, because it felt like if I continue taking that, that's going to do me in. And so I in terms of being with it, I made a decision to find a different way of relating to it. And that was a journey. So it's really hard to kind of capture it in one or two sentences. It's been like a long journey. And it started with this moment of saying, no, I'm in charge here. I'm going to unplug from all of this fear. I'm going to unplug from what I'm being given. And I'm just going to sit here and feel what happens when I do that. And then take the next step. That was to begin to try to learn about things.
Yeah, I find myself curious, but simultaneously unsure kind of what's a good question to ask around what must be a, huge experience and complexity and some things I really can't understand, I guess.
Well, at the same time, at this point, obviously, I do take, medication because we've come a long way, so to speak, in the last couple of decades. And so now I'm really grateful that it exists and I am taking the medication. I'm undetectable. And in that sense, it's been, an integral part of my experience, but also not so dominant anymore. This is how it's triggered my journey.
another thing that I only fairly recently learned, I go to a sexual health clinic in Brighton, which is like right in the heart of Kent Town, which is the British equivalent of the Castro. It's the sort of gayest part of the gayest town in England. And, I learned about this idea of being undetectable, like the levels can be so low in people now that you can't transmit it.
Yeah, there actually has been a few years ago, the first health department, the health department of Switzerland, had actually issued a statement to the WHO that they believe that people who are undetectable for a certain period of time are really no longer, a threat to people they have sex with, even if it's unprotected. So that was really bold to make such a statement, and to kind of so that gave rise to quite a bit of controversy, because for instance, if you get a cold or a flu or so, then the medication might not be as you might slip out of the undetectable status for a little bit, and so it's been difficult to actually really come to a final conclusion around that. And so there are different voices now about it.
Yeah. Well, I just thought it'd be good to put out on the show here a little bit of sort of education, as we have people around the world listening that might not be as informed as some of us. And hope you don't mind spending a little time on this. It felt important to talk about. I mean, of nearly 200 guests, you're the first one that's talked about this. So thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so because of this illness, you started to get interested in alternative practices and health. I mean, can you talk us through some of the forms that you trained in? Because I'm very curious about two of the main ones.
Well, I did start with hands-on body work. That was part of the body electric. That's what I mentioned before. So focus, and there the focus was to work specifically also with other men who had HIV. AIDS, and so there was a kind of, the touch was not coming from a place of wanting to fix something or to kind of get rid of tension, but the touch was about connection, and that kind of like to touch from that place really informed me in a different way that I didn't expect, which was that I was confusing my need for sexuality with my need for connection through physical closeness.
Yes.
And so, I understood suddenly, oh my God, I'm so nourished, even by the one who is doing the touching, who is being paid for it. I am so nourished by having the opportunity to touch this person, that it took off some of the kind of pattern, also, dysfunctional, that's maybe not the best word, but the kind of craving for sexuality that came from a place of emptiness, so to speak, a place of not wanting to feel certain things. So if I hadn't had this realm in which I could do the touching and be in this context, I would have been much more subjected, much more likely to act out sexually.
I've just finished 40 days of celibacy as a bit of a challenge for my 40th birthday. And one of the things I made sure to do was get a lot of touch and massage and body work in that time. Mm. And one of the things I've discovered over the years, and I feel like this is something gay and straight men share really, is we confuse the need for touch, connection, intimacy, many needs actually, with sex. And for many men, that's the only place, there's only one place they can meet all those needs. It's the only place they can get touch, the only place they can get intimacy, connection, whatever. And what I found is actually the sex drive is way lower than I thought once I get all those other needs met. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay, this isn't so hard, actually. I thought this would be really tricky, 40 days of no orgasm. And actually, pretty easy because I had the other needs met. And I think that's a real issue for just men generally.
And that's where basically the connection lies, because when I do, the whatever somatic practice it is, when I basically am on my own, I follow some instruction from a teacher, I roll on the floor. What I'm doing is I'm touching myself with my, awareness. So it's kind of a and it's kind of a different way of having somebody else there who touches me. So for most people, it's easier if they can, let and permit that, if they are okay with that, to get that kind of nourishment through the touch of someone else. And it's more difficult to touch yourself through your own awareness, or that the floor touch you, or that the breath touch you, or that the movement touch you, or the kind of intricacy of it. And so that's where, for me, it kind of comes together, where it relates with each other. And this is how, for me, actually, one part of my work developed, which was the application of somatics into encounter. It's like, how can I get what I receive in this work on myself, by understanding myself through movement, through breath, etc. How can I translate that into encounter? And not just, that the kind of, let's say, for instance, sexual craving would decrease, but any kind of in this one TED talk, there was this guy whose name I forgot, who said the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it is connection.
It sounds like Gabor Mate.
Probably. And so the quest for me became connection. How can I become more connected? And at the same time, being constantly met with my own demons around it, and finding ways to, procrastinating. But there's also an interesting story that I find that keeps coming back to me as an inspiration to do something with. And that is that in one of my events, once we call it an open space, which is kind of a period within a longer event, like a week-long event, to design your own material and to explore your own sort of topics. And this one person said, I'd like to be touched until I say it's enough. And so then there was one person who volunteered to sort of orchestrate something that ended up to be like an 8-hour touch session. So this person basically, got one person after the other who came there to provide connection through touch. And years after that, he still kind of says that some kind of very strong, there has been sort of it has been post-nourishing in a very fundamental way, meaning that a certain edge in the cravings, everyday cravings, whether it's sweets or work or whatever it is, has been taken off fundamentally by somebody being there through touch, ongoingly, without interruption, hour after hour, where you go through all kinds of emotional stuff, like, isn't this a bit much to ask for something like this? I feel guilt. I feel shame about being touched in this place. I feel like this is outrageous. Everybody is like green with envy around me. And then the actual pleasure parts of it. Can I let myself be, can I actually let the sounds come out that really are there right now? And so you go through a journey, maybe also some boredom, maybe you don't feel anything anymore. And all of a sudden, you are kind of reached on a level that is so deep that it, I wonder how many talk sessions, how many actual verbal talk sessions that would be able to bypass when we address the territory that is essentially nonverbal in nature. And so I've had this idea of maybe creating a study where you would actually, how could you measure this? How could you measure a type of post-nourishment that happens on a nonverbal level, where something in your general tonus kind of shifts in a way that it just goes through and somehow it stays?
Yeah, I mean, you could work with, I'm coming from an addiction background. You could certainly work with relapse levels of people on a so like a 90-day residential, and you could have a control group, and half of them get the touch and half don't, like that you could track the relapse levels. That would be one way.
So there it's been basically embodiment somatics has been a quest for me to just stay sane somehow, and to kind of get nourished. And once I got in contact with the breath and with Continuum, it also became, it opened up a spiritual question for me, which is always a bit dicey to use, a word a bit dicey to use in the German context.
Really? Why is that?
Because, having lived in the US so long, it feels at the moment, you use that word here, it very quickly can be related to esoteric kind of condescending sort of judgments, basically.
I'm keen to ask about the German context as well, as I'm fascinated by the embodiment scene there in Berlin and starting to make some inroads into it. And, I've taught there for the first time and coming back again. I like on your website, it says, for example, I hold the German Heilpraktiker license. Mm-hmm. As I understand it, in Germany, sort of licenses and qualifications are quite a big deal for people.
Yes, yeah.
You say that like it's not a given everywhere. Like you don't have to have a license to be a coach in England, for example.
I'm not like, how is it for you? I mean, there's, it does, do something to one's credibility if you have completed this or that kind of program and can show it somehow. I mean, there's, lots of other stuff that I have done, which is mainly basically having become in retrospect a space builder that is like creating infrastructures and spaces in which something can happen that can't be measured in that way. Mm-hmm. And it can't be certified in that way. And there's certainly lots of content and life experience that can't be measured or certified in that way. But because I have most of my life not actually paid so much attention to that. To me personally, that is not such a big deal. Like I don't buy into that so much.
Yeah. It's just a couple of colleagues say it was a cultural difference from working there. Okay, and you were talking about the spiritual word. Then we kind of went off on a tangent there. So,
well, with that I mean that part of what like the value of somatics for me is basically the question: how deeply can I come into this body, and at the same time, in a certain way, let go. In a certain way, not know. And in that sense, Middendorf breath has been a perfect approach for me because it's working with the breath that happens, that unfolds in the body without telling it how to unfold or where to unfold. And so there are certain kind of exploration and movement sort of suggestions that will then that are likely to invite the breath to be perceivable in certain areas, but it's not that I'm going to say breathe into your pelvis or breathe into the back of your neck or into your armpit, but like sense your armpit and wait until your consciousness there has hovered there long enough so that your breath gets interested to visit that. Like you begin to understand that your awareness becomes like a magnet for breath movement. So it's not like I'm pushing it there, but I am waiting with my awareness. I could wait in my palm, I could wait in my butt or in my foot, and my breath will respond to it. Mm-hmm. And so it's that kind of, oh my God, something is happening to me just because I place my attention somewhere. The rest is happening. And I'm just watching that, I'm witnessing it. And that simultaneousness of I am the territory in which this happens, but I'm also the observer, and I'm also like not quite knowing how it unfolds. That is sort of the entry place for me where it turns spiritual in the sense that it becomes larger than my personal idea of myself, than who I think Kai is or what my biography is. Suddenly there's something that feels it is more expansive than how I would describe myself as a person. And that kind of transcendence of my own kind of sense of myself through these doorways of the body where something happens to me. Is why I call it. And both Middendorf and Continuum are two practices that at the center of their interest place the question, what happens if I get out of the way? So Middendorf does this through the breath, and Continuum does it through stimulating basically the fluid in the tissues.
This is a very interesting, perhaps paradox is the right word, in embodiment, isn't there? That we go deeper into the body, we attune to the body more, we bring more awareness to the body. And you'd think that would make people feel more kind of solid or separate in themselves. You know, this is me now, I've got a really good sense of me. But actually the opposite's true. Often there's a dissolving of boundaries with self, other, and world, or there's a freeing of attachment there. When it strikes us as quite an interesting thing that I've heard from many senior embodiment teachers, that is perhaps not what you'd first expect if you said, right, we're going to pay lots of attention to the body.
Yeah. But to some degree, it can be both. It's like on the one hand, what I perceive myself to be, as I just explained, can fall apart. It becomes larger. It disintegrates. But also, there's a part of me that becomes clearer. So it's a kind of a paradox. Like I get sharper, and at the same time, I get blurrier. And in that. Somehow in that polarity, something happens that I just find endlessly fascinating.
Yeah.
Or like when, for instance, that's where the question is: when does something become a transgression? When do I actually go into a trance? In the sense that I check out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And because, especially for people who are new to exploring in this realm, sometimes people have a really sort of strong experience that they, find quite spectacular. But the language actually signals that they have checked out, that they are in some kind of, space that is also, really beautiful and lovely. But it's not necessarily the sort of the being here, the like really. Precision of being awake in this moment. It's more like a floaty kind of sort of I'm dissolving into the vastness of space and time, and that then becomes a little bit something else, I find. So it's to navigate these two places of how to remain alert enough and at the same time surrendered enough, so that this kind of polarity can exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it, the balance between alertness and surrender, the kind of yin-yang sides of it, and holding both of those simultaneously, which isn't the easiest tightrope to walk. I'm also aware of that tendency in some circles to sort of the sort of new age transcendence, which feels more like a dissociation.
Yeah.
Transcend and include, it doesn't seem to have that anchor, that root in the body. Quick interruption to tell you about my book, Embodiment. Creatively named, hey? Actually, Embodiment Moving Beyond Mindfulness. You can find this online at theembodimentbook.com. That's theembodimentbook.com. So this book is an introduction to the whole field. If you like these interviews, you'll probably love this book. Funny stuff, poems, personal stories from my life, illustrating what embodiment's all about, and loads for professionals in the field too. Top teaching tips, language tips, that kind of thing. Yeah, a real condensation of everything I've learned about embodiment, basically. So you can get pre-orders at Amazon.com, and if you just put in Embodiment Moving Beyond Mindfulness, that's the name of the book, or go to theembodimentbook.com. On there, you'll see quotes from various teachers, a bunch of fun illustrations, and you can also get the first chapter completely free online at theembodimentbook.com. Enjoy, and back to the interview. Maybe you could say a bit more about Continuum. This is something I haven't been able to get a lesson of yet, despite some efforts. And I'm trying to get a lesson with you at some point, or there doesn't seem to be much of it in the UK. So could you say this is Emily Conrad's work, right?
Yes. She she was trained as a dancer, and at some point went to Haiti, and there witnessed a kind of movement in the people who were from there that signaled to her that they were in contact with something that she could see but not understand. And that was somehow being in resonance with basically life, to not just move from a choreographic kind of or playful or sort of staged interest, like a dancer perhaps might want to do, but to move from a connection with life. And so she wanted to understand what that was that she saw. And she always referred to herself as somebody who has a PhD in blanking on the English word right now. Basically, being always on the lookout, being a bit paranoid, like
hyper alertness, hypervigilance.
Yes, hypervigilance. That's what I was looking for. And so she recognized at some point that even though she was so adept at being a dancer, being able to do all these things on stage, there was a part of her that was essentially still frozen, emotionally frozen. And that part was touched through that inquiry that then kind of unfolded. And so she became smaller and smaller with her movement practices to kind of understand what actually happens if I break it down more and more. And one of the videos that are really, there's not so much material that's out there, but one of the videos with Susan Harper, who was one of the early teachers alongside Emily, is that intrinsic movement, where you actually try to move within a movement, within the movement. What's the movement that's there? And out of that came this kind of, one of the famous quotes of her, which is, before we do movement, we already are movement. And the interest of Continuum is to get in touch with ourselves as living processes that are already moving before we add anything. And so, in a sense, Continuum is an inquiry into the intelligence of movement, like movement as a language, that the movement itself is knowledge. The movement itself is a language.
And Continuum is famous for these very fluid qualities of movement, isn't there? I watched a sort of famous, beautiful video of someone's back, and it was almost like it was made of liquid.
I think that's what you're referring to, that which I just meant. That's
the same video, yeah.
With Emily and Susan. And yes, it's about kind of breaking the movement down more and more until it becomes like that. And so there is a kind of, so a lot of the movement patterns are wave motion, it's pulsation, it's spirals. It's like what is at the bottom of movement dynamics? What are the recurring patterns? And when you zoomed in on that video, you could kind of see this quivering, for instance, and it could be some other creature, in the sea, and not the area underneath the ribcage of a human being. And so Emily was just in this constant kind of quest to understand what is it, what's like at the bottom. If we deconstruct movement, what do we find? And one of the guiding questions was, how do we become self-limiting? Meaning, why do we become patterned when life actually has the ability to constantly reinvent itself and to adapt to the context that it finds itself in? Like, there is this ability of life to adapt. And where do we have to go back to if we are too patterned to find that place from where we can readapt to the actual context, rather than dragging the time space of our own history in our bodies along and kind of moving from a place that is not really this context. And so we're not able anymore to adapt to this context because our tissue has taken on the shape of our past. And so it becomes locked into a particular way of moving our heads, being in a particular posture. And Continuum is about trying to break it down, so that we can kind of then wait to see, how does it want to reconstitute itself if after we've broken it down? what does it want to now coalesce into? And that's where the waiting part comes back in. That's where that's what we refer to as a drop, as a dive. It's like I drop into the into my ancientness, so to speak, into the ancient intelligence that that somehow shaped this whole organism in the first place.
Mm, mm. And what does a class look like? This one-to-one work, this class, give us a bit more of a sense of what happens in that.
Well, classes usually explore just some sort of simple ways to move in these archetypal ways, like, let's say, wave motion in the spine, or wave motion in your hands, or micro movements, so that you really get interested in the intricacy of things. And we use sounds for it to kind of stimulate, through the sound, to kind of stimulate movement. Like, for instance, a sound could be, and when you have 20 people in the room, and 12 of them do at some unknown moment, and 8 of them do at some unknown moment, you kind of weave a soundscape where the attention sort of drops more and more into just what's present, like to drop underneath the story and to just really let the body know itself and be felt without any kind of further instruction, and then have a lot of space for it to respond to that. So it's a stimulation, the sound, and maybe a wave motion, and then there is space to respond to that.
Both of these methods that are less well known in the UK. It seems like Middendorf maybe is more well known in Central Europe. There's a lot of kind of Central European traditions that aren't particularly known in the UK, or maybe in America. But then Continuum, I've had Californian friends who were trained in that. What do they add to the kind of embodiment world? Is there something sort of unique about them, or something that you think is like, people should really know about this? This is something a bit different.
Well, we're like a lot of, especially again, this would be a German context. Like, what I'm asked a lot is, what is this good for?
Right.
No, like, give me the 5 bullet points of why I should be doing this.
Yeah.
And so it's the opposite of that, and that's why it's not something that people flock to. It's because I go, for instance, maybe to a yoga class, and I'm being guided the whole time. I'm being, run through a sequence of movements, and there is a structure that sort of holds me, and I may be really needing that and wanting that as a way to support the rest of my, life, or my working life, or I have, a big family and lots of things to do. And so going to a class where somebody else is taking the responsibility and leading me through a movement that I follow, to some extent, is perhaps more accessible.
Yeah, more healing.
Whereas in Middendorf breath or Continuum, you're constantly asked to sense yourself. You're constantly asked to actually be not only sensing, but to also let something that you don't know happen and give space for it. Mm-hmm. So it's something for people who it's like you need to taste it in a certain way to be able to describe it in a way that makes sense verbally. Like, I'm now trying to get
it's tricky.
In a way that is so pre-verbal, because when I actually experience that I am being breathed and that I am moving, that I'm being moved as space, it becomes it's just an amazing experience. But I have to find it again. I cannot go there necessarily because a teacher tells me. I have to, there is, classes where it just doesn't happen. And then all of a sudden there's a moment where you're like, thump, and you know that you are connected to this place. And one of the contributions is that we're getting in touch with a deeply self-regulatory wisdom. And that is something where that we need at the moment, also globally, with what's going on, climate, etc. So there, in that sense, to me, the Somatic Academy is like a Trojan horse, because I know that I will not get people to want to sense their breath and to engage in hour-long micro movements, because they can't immediately understand why they should be doing it. It is like a form of initiation, so to speak. Like it initiates you. And so it felt like I needed to create all these bridges for people to basically eventually come to this stuff.
Yeah, and I think there's a maturing of the sort of somatic palette, where one often matures towards more subtle and less directed work when one realizes the depths of that. Though I think it's partly a personal preference, partly almost a political preference. I mean, I found definitely a cultural preference in Berlin. It was quite difficult to direct people. The sort of, I have a fairly authoritative kind of style from martial arts in my teaching, and I had to tone that way the fuck down in Berlin, because it was just, otherwise I'd get girls dressed in black with sharp haircuts sort of looking at me, in an unpleasant manner. And I was like, whoa, I'm really in Berlin. Okay, chill out with that. If you don't mind, maybe explore it, please. And I found there was almost an allergy there to kind of authority in some circles, though I taught in two places. One was much more somatic, and another one was much more just like normal big city yoga type people. I taught a yoga group, and they had less of that and more of this kind of just standard yoga, tell me what to do kind of vibe. But even there, I had to be a little bit careful of the authoritative kind of style.
Well, are you surprised?
No. I mean, history, right? I do find that interesting, though. There's a particular, maybe listeners don't know, we have quite a listenership in Germany, actually. It's one of the biggest countries that listen to this podcast. But there is a particular scene in Berlin. There's a lot of somatic work, if nothing else.
Yes.
Well, I find that interesting.
Yeah, well, Middendorf, for instance, developed her work here. She worked here. There was a strong sort of back and forth from here, between other countries, between Germany and the US, that kind of was mutually fertilizing this ground and kind of nourishing it. And so, it goes back a few generations now, and there is definitely, for whatever reason that I also can't quite put into words, maybe perhaps similar even to San Francisco, there is, it's a kind of magnet for both the exploration of these for things that are not quite in the mainstream yet, and at the same time they are both places that really, where it's really important to have your sexual freedom. So there's something interestingly similar in
Berlin has this history.
I'm not sure whether there is a connection to it, but that's at least what sort of stands out for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of even holistic practitioners and people who are interested in somatics and so on, but you also have a lot of spaces that are interested in new ways of, new relationship models, new ways of relating to.
There's a big kink scene, isn't there? There's also a kind of a drug scene. It's got a darkness to it. Berlin, I found the Bay Area doesn't have. There's some similarities, like, it's a big gay town, it's a big arts town, there's a lot of somatic stuff, but then there's this kind of darkness to Berlin too that I felt was in almost like a decaying opulence sometimes. I remember one time with Christo at the Berlin Embodiment Circle, we did a circle and it was in a sort of decaying ballroom kind of thing. It seemed very Berlin. And walking around it at night with my wife going, okay, there's a certain vibe here that's a little edgy. I quite like it.
Yeah, but it's also sort of shifting. It is becoming less. It feels to me that people have explored that so much now for the last few decades again, that there's a certain saturation point and the interest is shifting a bit.
Okay. Interesting. And it also just seemed like there was just a lot of stuff there. Like when I went to the Somatic Academy, your place, for a evening workshop, I was doing a little guest teaching at a thing there. There was just posters on the wall for so many things. And it wasn't just contact improv. There was lots of that. You know, it wasn't just Feldenkrais, things I'd heard of. It was underwater, contact tango with unicorns. It was like creative, like novel explorations of artistic things. I was like, wow, there's some really interesting cross-fertilization happening here.
Yeah. Well, one of the ideas of the Somatic Academy is to basically to basically have an actual physical location that is more that where things can come together that relate to somatics and the body without constantly fighting with each other, because that's part of the of culture. That when I first went through my Middendorf breath training, there was a certain kind of vibe of somehow having to prove or validate, which approach now is the real winner.
Right.
All of these approaches. And so one of the reasons for the idea behind this American, one of them was to create an umbrella space where they can just really not only exist next to each other, but where they can learn from each other and kind of really understand what is the strength of a particular method, where is Feldenkrais strong, where is BMC strong, and where is the weakness of a method, and how can they support each other. And so by somehow turning it on the head and not looking through methods, but by looking through topics, and this is how we basically started to build the training, is to look at movement development through, ground, space, individuation, communication. And when all the different methods orient to a topic, then it can become very interesting. If BMC, Feldenkrais, Middendorf, Continuum look at what do we have to say about the issue of ground and gravity, then something can kind of coalesce in the person that gets in contact with all these different principles that makes sense in an actual application way.
Yes. And I've always found it almost kind of sad when I'd hear like Feldenkrais people criticizing Alexander technique or vice versa, and I'd think nobody bloody even knows what Feldenkrais is outside of Brighton and Bay Area and Berlin. It's always places with B for some reason, Byron Bay, and but no one knows what it is. So why are you even arguing? Like really, the similarities are more bigger than the differences.
Ivory towerish kind of thing, and so the intention was to have a place where we can see what happens if we, bring the methods to the table that are basically part of the fabric of the people who are, in our founding team. Of course, there are some things that we don't offer that also exist, but that's just because of the people who are part of our team. But essentially, this is where Body IQ comes in, to really make it really wide and to, also have a kind of opportunity for people to network and to learn about each other and learn about each other's different approaches and way of having synthesized ideas and approaches.
Maybe you can say a little bit about this festival then. I'll be there in November, so let's give you a good advert for it. But what's it all about?
Well, it's Body IQ, so it relates back to what I was referring to earlier, this kind of interest in what is the actual sort of intelligence of the body. And every year we have a topic for it. And this time it's going to be like 50 different workshops. And if you participate, you basically design your own journey. 4 times a day, you decide, between A, B, and C, option A, B, and C, I'm going to go to B, and 2 hours later, I'm going to go to C, and then in the afternoon, I go to A or B again. And in this way, everybody kind of finds their own journey through their interest. And at the same time, it creates a sort of climate of exploration over the course of 3 days that weaves a very particular beautiful energy of, lots of people who've spent many years of their lives exploring this, coming together into, one space and sharing, either by teaching or by participating. And it somehow, it strengthens the sense of, meaningfulness of it, which can sometimes get a bit lost, I think, because, as you were just saying, who even knows Feldenkrais? Like, what is the meaning of it? Like, the world is falling apart around us. How is what we're doing in any way meaningful?
Mm-hmm.
It's like the festival serves as a kind of place to explore, to get inspired, to learn about new things, to try things out, but to also to recharge.
Yeah, and there's a few interesting people there that I've heard of. Thomas Camp's one of the organisers, right? I was hanging out with him in Coventry, and we'll get on. Martha Eddy from New York, I know quite well. I'll be teaching with her in Brighton fairly soon. And Krista, we had on the show, of course. There's a fair few people coming. I was looking at the teachers lineup here. There's about 50 names on it.
Yes, it's a great mixture this time, also because Thomas is involved, who is teaching at the Bath Spa University. So there's lots of people who are coming from the sort of academia, who are in that world, and lots of people who are in a sort of freelancer world, like I am, or artists who use somatics as a way of folding it into their artistic inquiries.
Essentially, I was at this conference in Coventry, and there was sort of somatic academics there, and this was an entirely new thing for me. I've always been on the very practical, cold-facing business and yoga and things like this, and it was really interesting to me. People were doing papers on somatic things, and it was an entirely different way into it than I was used to. Okay, so the dates are the 15th, 16th, and 17th of November of this year. Mm-hmm. And the website is bodyiq.berlin.
That's right.
People can go on there. There's videos and different names, different things there. So I will hope to see some of our listeners there. If people listen to this podcast and they think, I'd like to do sort of one thing this year, but I'm not sure what, I think this would be a good choice, because you'd be able to get a taste of lots of different approaches and meet many different practitioners.
On being human in a world begging for our passion, compassion, and action is our topic. We have also, next to the workshops, some podium discussions and one evening full of performances. 3 days in November, when it's cold and nasty outside.
It's cold and nasty outside. Yeah, I'm going to be in Israel most of November, so I normally try and escape November, but I'm leaving the sun to come to this festival. So
I trust climate change that there will be some snow in Israel.
That you trust climate change? There was for the first time in Jerusalem. I think it was last winter, a year or two ago, for the first time ever. But yeah, it's a bit too hot here in England now. Actually, people are starting to realise the reality of it when it's come home. Okay. So what else? Body IQ. Anything else you want to talk about in terms of your general activities in Berlin?
Well, I am super bad at saying promotional things. So just check out the website. We're actually about to launch a new website. At the moment, it will be still in German until we have managed to translate everything. But soon, let's say in 3-4 months, there actually will be an English version of the entire website, because we have a bunch of really exciting professional trainings to integrate all of these approaches. And our interest is to basically look at application, like somatics and mediation, or somatics in the performing arts world, or somatics and hands-on, or somatics and working with kids and movement development for teachers and people who work, like in kindergarten, for instance.
I'm planning to camp out for a few weeks next year at some point at the Somatic Academy. I can't quite figure out what's the best time of year to come from the calendar and things in German, but I'll ask again in November. But my plan is to just sort of come and rent an Airbnb next door, and because this is sort of what I do in Brighton, but I have to run around all over town. Whereas there, I could just go to one place and not have to run around so much. So that's my plan to visit.
There you go. We can lock you in, and then we just bring you food.
lock me in, throw me scraps of meat every now and again. and not, you're not allowed out till you're properly embodied, Mark. Come on. And
that's what Emily said to me. She was like, I want you to come to California. I want to lock you in for 4 months so that you can just kind of, like non-stop immersion. I never did.
But we're very lucky to live in places where we can at least do, I do pretty good regular classes. I had a great bodywork session last night. And I think we're in a way, we're very privileged to live in places like Brighton and Berlin. Even though we don't have an academy here, we do have a lot of good teachers and, 5 rhythms, 3 streets from my house, and a Buddhist center with yoga classes 4 streets from my house. I mean, this is life in Brighton. I know there's people that listen to us around the world, and I'm kind of wondering how they must feel hearing about all the slightly sport for choice we are in these places.
Yeah, and there are also some downsides. So there's it's a very privileged position. At the same time, it's also if you're not, we're just talking about academia. If you have to make it in that world, like under sheer market conditions, it's also not the easiest thing, no matter where you are, whether you're in Brighton or Berlin or elsewhere in the world. So I just want to just extend my appreciation to anybody who is devoting their lives to somehow bringing this precious information to the world, to people who may not know what it's about and what it's for. Because it can be really hard and can feel really lonely to be in that position, because you constantly have to explain what it is and why it is. And so I just want to extend at this moment my appreciation to anybody who does it, because I know myself how hard it can be. The torch for it, and to not succumb to, I'm going to do something that is more mainstream.
And I know people even just holding down a little yoga class in a small town and having to constantly explain it and be met with prejudice and be met with just frustration and be putting in that work week after week. So salutes and hats off to everyone out there who's doing their little bit of this kind of global movement. Okay, so it feels like we're coming to a natural close here. Are there any subjects that you would like to speak about that we haven't covered yet?
Oh, well, I need your guidance at that.
You are a bugger to interview, Kai. I tell you, if you weren't so beautiful, I'd be angry. This is sometimes with you. I there's so much knowledge, and I have to squeeze it out of you. So you're humble. So let me think here. So we've covered a little bit of Continuum, Middendorf, Berlin. Maybe it's enough for today. Maybe it's enough. I want to extend that invite to everyone to the Body IQ Festival. If you're going to do one somatics thing in Europe this year, I think that's a great one to do. I actually turned down a TED talk to come because it was my priority and a free flight to New Zealand. So this was my priority to be there. And I hope some of the listeners we see there. And as I said, the scene there is great in Berlin, and you'll be one of the people that's really been at the center of that. So, don't be too humble. Credit to you too for taking the risk of the Somatic Academy.
Thank you. We will put up a TED sign for your workshop.
Yeah, I want some flashing lights, some paparazzi, and I know how Germans deal with big egos, so that won't end well with it. So,
thank you.
Okay, so final message about the body. Do you have a final message for listeners?
Keep coming back to it.
Keep coming back. I like it. That's simple and nice. All right. So your websites, if people want to find them, we mentioned body. I'll link them on my website as ever with the show. But bodyiq.berlin, kaiehrhardt.com, and somatic-academy.de for the Somatic Academy. Right.
That's correct.
Rolls off the tongue. Okay, Kai. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Ciao.
some ways to get more, to give back, and to get more involved now. So the biggest request I have would be to share the podcast with your friends, people that you think would really enjoy it. Email it to them, put it on your social media, tell them about it, old school. Really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support us financially, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/embodiment podcast and give us $1 an episode. And I'd say they're well worth $1. So that's less than £1 if you're in UK-ish. So yeah, please go there. On the embodifacilitator.com website is where this is hosted. If most people I think listen to for iTunes. iTunes, we'd certainly appreciate a review. The way iTunes works means that a review means more people will find it. iTunes regards it as more important for searches. So even a couple of sentences review really does help as a little thank you to us. And if you want to go to embodifacilitator.com, you can see the actual, links to the sites. There's comments on there. The Facebook group tends to be where people discuss things. So if you go to put in the Embodiment podcast into Facebook, there's a page which is relatively quiet and a group which does have some discussion on. So I will reply to things personally there. So also on embodifacilitator.com website, there's all sorts of freebies there. There's videos, there's free ebooks, there's ebooks you can buy. And of course, there's our newsletter list. If you want to stay in touch and learn about things like the Embodied Facilitator course and our next Embodied Yoga Principles teacher training, then go to that website and you'll see a little pop-up and you can get the newsletter through there. Okay, so I think they're the main ones. Tell your friends, pay us some money on Patreon, give us a review on iTunes, send us your email if you want to be on the newsletter list, and get involved on the Facebook there. Bit long. Pick whatever you like that works for you. Until next time, welcome home to the body.